Welcome back to the Word Podcast, sports, news, and stuff. Episode 21, a little bit of a special edition episode for you here today. James Mundia joined by my esteemed co-host, Richard Bruce Abernathy. We are back, and we're switching it up on people.
Y'all should have got rid of us when you had the chance. They should have. We're here to stay now.
21 episodes. People think it's a game. We're back. Just another normal week in the craziest times that any of us have experienced in our lifetimes. And so we thought we would maybe take a little bit of a different approach and discuss some of the things that we've been both ranting about on the program for the last couple of weeks with an expert.
But rather than us ranting and raving and not knowing what the hell we're talking about, we figured we would bring in an expert to talk about some of the things that we've been discussing. So we'll get to that a little further in the program. Mm-hmm. But as always, if you are listening to this, you could be listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spreaker, Google Podcasts. We are everywhere podcasts are not sold, but given away for free. Please hit that subscribe button, rate us, review us, and you can follow us on Twitter at The Word Podcast. And we may have some other ways that you can reach out to us here soon. We won't get into that today, but
not just yet. Yeah, don't spill
we're
the
gonna
beans.
Tease it. We're gonna tease it a little bit.
That's a good tease. This guy's a professional broadcaster.
Ish.
So we're back. Well, at least we didn't have any more. I think
we
I
did.
just. I think I just jinxed myself. I was going to say we didn't have any more crazy outbreaks in Major League Baseball. I guess it wasn't really an outbreak, but there were some cases.
Well,
the Cardinals.
the whole Cardinals team had it.
Yeah, it's. So we're just doing this now, huh? We're gonna plug along and go for it.
Well, they're wearing masks in the dugout now, so everything's cool.
I don't understand. So that was an optional thing beforehand. I'm confused.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and at a certain point, you're all sitting there. You're all in the dugout on the field together. You're around one another. Like I get it. I mean, take as many precautions as you can, but at a certain point, it feels like it's more all of the stuff outside the ballpark that's the problem. But maybe that's just anecdotal, and that's just the way I'm looking at it. And obviously, everything you can do to reduce the risk of transmission is a good thing. So I don't mean to make light of them wearing masks, but it seems like that's probably not enough to stem the tide and stop whatever was happening from happening. It seems like a bigger issue than that, but
yeah,
I mean, I guess it's something. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the issue. Is it's almost like everything's becoming a token gesture now. It's like, well, I'm wearing a mask, so I did what I could. Okay, well, I guess we put ourselves in this situation now because we made that such a big deal that now, if anything happens, even if people are wearing masks, now it's gonna become hard to mitigate anything beyond. But maybe we won't have to. Maybe things will sort themselves out in a positive way. But I think one of the things that I've been committed to in the past few weeks, especially, has been the new reality that this is where we are. It's going to be like this for a while, and I don't think that that's necessarily changeable. So, and even in just a day-to-day social interaction, I think that we're going to always be dealing with this, at least for the next year or so. So anyway, but that's just sort of, again, we look at it through the lens of sports, and it's just weird because it's also happening in our lives every day too, and not everybody has the choice to say, oh, I'm not going to deal with it. So it's a little bit interesting to me, but I'm not trying to be morbid about it. I'm trying to just reflect a little bit.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that has been a nice distraction for the last week.
Uh-oh.
It's been even better than I thought. I've been even giddier about it than I thought it was going to be. But having NBA games back on every day, and not just on every day, But starting at like 2:30 in the afternoon, I mean, my work productivity has nosedived. It's like, 2:30. All right, I gotta watch this Memphis game.
Yeah.
And, I mean, but it's fantastic. There have been a bunch of good games. I mean, there have been a few blowouts. Mm-hmm. But getting it down to the top 22 teams and losing a bunch of those bad teams, I do think has helped the quality of the games. The Nets roster notwithstanding. I mean, they had a game against the Bucks the other day where the Bucks barely played any of their guys. The Nets are already down like 4 or 5 of their top guys anyway, and then they sat a couple of their normal starters that didn't play at all. It felt like a summer league game. It really did, between being in like the afternoon and the guys that were on the court. It was a weird vibe. So there's been a few of those, but there have also been a couple of really entertaining games, and we've seen some awesome performances out of guys.
Luka.
He had a 30-20-10 triple-double the other day. And I think I saw a stat, I want to say it was from since the NBA-ABA merger, I want to say it was, that there have been 4 30-20-10 triple-doubles, and 2 of them have happened this season. Can you name the other player that had a 30-20-10 triple-double?
No, I cannot. Who was that?
We talked about him on the show, or I talked about him on the show a couple weeks ago.
Don't say it was Gobert.
No, it was our boy Nikola Jokic.
Oh my gosh. The Europeans are taking over.
They're taking over.
Oh my gosh.
Luka and Porzingis have just been dealing. They've been really fun to watch.
You know what? As much as I've been ranting and raving about how I hate that, that we're so focused on, we gotta get sports back. I really do miss regular season NBA games. Like having just moved to Dallas, like going out to a bar and like watching like a regular season like Mavericks game. It was so entertaining because those guys and you can really tell like they don't quit. Like this Mavericks team is like they're really hungry and they're good. So like they're just so entertaining, and like Porzingis, like, dude, I don't know what the Knicks, man. What? Oh my god!
I mean, he didn't want to be there.
Why? Can you blame him?
It was still a terrible trade, but I mean, and they sort of dug their own grave on that one. But I mean, with he had some injuries. I mean, it was still kind of indefensible when it happened, and when I heard what the deal was, I was like, oh my god, this isn't going to end well.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest. I mean, first part of the season in this year in Dallas, his first year in Dallas wasn't great. I mean, he was still kind of working his way back. I mean,
yeah,
because he basically missed like almost 2 years. A good year and a half because he got hurt in I think January of 2018, and missed the rest of that season and all of last season. So
yeah.
It took him a little while to get back up to speed, but once he did, I mean, he's been looking really good in Orlando, and they gave the Clippers a good fight tonight. Clippers wound up pulling away in the fourth quarter and won by 15, but there have been some really fun games and matchups. I don't know if you saw that Houston-Milwaukee game over the weekend. That was a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. It's just been fun having the NBA back every night, and even more so every afternoon. God, it's great.
Well, you're experiencing what I experience every 4 years with the World Cup, because depending on what country the games are being played in, you could be talking about games going from like 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. in the first round, where they play 3 games a day, and like it's so funny. Like, like I'll have a job, and like my boss during that period will be like expecting me to work, and I'm like, do you not understand what's going on? Sweden is about to play Bolivia, dude. You better chill. We got like 3 games. In fact, I think sometimes I don't know if it's 4 games a day or is it 3. I mean, in the first round, there's a lot of games, and oh man, it's heaven. It is my March Madness. Even though, as I said before we jumped back on the air tonight, I actually don't like the sport or anybody involved in it. But when the World Cup comes around, I am I'm back in. So you're in the middle of your World Cup right now. This is great.
It's great, and playoffs are just around the corner.
I know, it's weird, right? Like I'm trying to like figure out like my calendar is so messed up because it's like almost mid-August, but like we still haven't had that like typical like finals like rush, and I'm like, oh, it's because we just started playing again. But that's exciting, and what we've talked about on the show, it looks like the NBA has been handling things as well as you can given the scenario.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I know they've had a few tests with false positives or unclear results, and they've had to amend some of that policy a little bit for retesting and how long guys need to hang out after they have one of those, just because that could cause a problem down the line. You get an inconclusive test, and now all of a sudden somebody's missing, game 6 of a playoff series, and they don't have it. It's like the Apollo 13 where the guy didn't get the measles. But, you have to take precautions and not, you have to kind of assume the worst until you know otherwise. But they do seem to kind of have their shit together from a health standpoint and a procedure standpoint. So we got a longer track record of that happening. It makes me feel better about this lasting. But as always, anything with coronavirus, you're just always waiting for the other shoe to drop. So we'll see how things go over the next couple of months.
Yeah.
But I'm increasingly optimistic about the NBA and increasingly pessimistic about just about every other sport.
Yeah, it's weird, right? Like I guess it's strange to be in this scenario where it's one thing to have a preference. Like, for instance, for a long time, I wasn't really into watching baseball. That's changed in the last couple of years. I actually really enjoy baseball, but it's weird to like now be in a situation where it's like not only do I, like if you didn't like baseball, but now you also don't like the way that they're responding to the pandemic, right? And maybe you're a big NBA fan, and so you're kind of like carrying that as like, yeah, like we know what we're doing. It's so now it's like you have like fans of leagues, and then and then with the leagues that haven't even started back up again, it also makes me think like they've got to be thinking like, oh boy, like if we get this wrong, this could go really bad. But if we get it right, it could be really, really right. Because, I mean, you got to imagine those NBA ratings have got to be skyrocketing. I haven't looked at any stats yet, but they've got to be out of control.
Well, Marcus just came through and sent me an article about the NBA ratings.
Oh, what have you got? What kind of numbers are you talking about?
Apparently they're good, not great.
Huh. Interesting.
So it's up a little bit, but it's not. I was expecting we were going to see like a doubling at least.
Right, because I just assumed that we've been talking about this for weeks, months, and it's happening. And but okay, so what are people doing? I don't know. Maybe it's good.
Listen, maybe the site in Orlando is not the only NBA bubble that people are inside of, and maybe we just overestimated how excited everybody was for the NBA to come back. I don't know.
Yeah, we made it seem like it was like a matter of life and death. Like if they play games, like
maybe we just both spent too much time in the word echo chamber of how big the NBA is going to be.
The word bubble. We have to get our temperature tested every day. Every time I walk into the studio, Marcus has got to check the temperature. Make sure I don't have a fever. It's we're really being diligent about it over here. So
we're running low on hand sanitizer. So
I haven't seen a bottle of hand sanitizer. I don't go to the stores very often, so I guess that could be part of it. But it's been a couple months, like hand sanitizer, like in person.
Found some Lysol wipes a couple weeks ago and thought I had found like a winning lottery ticket.
Wow, Indiana Jones over here. Did you have to take it off and like replace it with like a stone to make sure like it didn't?
I did. I had to put like a juice on there to approximate the weight. It was a green tea actually.
That's such a great scene. I don't know how anybody could be that creative. Honestly, how could you be that creative? Like, how can somebody be that creative? That the framing, the direction of the actor, the lighting. It doesn't even. I mean, of course, I was going to say it doesn't seem real. Of course, it's not real, but it's just so brilliantly done. That is such a great movie.
That Spielberg guy is going places.
I'll tell you, this is a small independent filmmaker. I think, but he could probably, really, move to something bigger later on.
I would say the Lucas guy too, but I guess he had already gone places and was pretty much done at that point.
He was over it. Oh man,
what's the sports corollary for George Lucas?
Oh man, that's actually a really good one, because you got to realize that is it like Gale Sayers or Penny Hardaway or somebody like, where just House of Fire to start and then just immediately kind of fell off the map? Well, not fell off the map, but like just never approached that same success again. But the hard part with Lucas, though, is that he mastered and some people think it was accidental, some people think it was intentional, he mastered, before it was even a thing, the business side of merchandise. And that bought him the freedom to make the prequels, because he was making money on this merchandise that 20th Century Fox in 1976 was like, yeah, you can have your merchandising money for this movie no one's going to see. Take it. And then it became one of the highest grossing films of all time. They made 2 more of them. So that gave him the freedom to not just, he's a co-founder of Pixar. Pixar is like a side project of his years ago. And it gave him the freedom.
He's been super successful, but just not in the way that he was initially, nothing against the Star Wars prequels, but right. I don't think they historically rank up there with the original trilogy.
Well, but now and this is another can of worms, but we won't go into it. But then now there's a school of thought, and I know this because this is what I do with my free time, that there's a school of thought now that and people like myself, I include myself in this group, because we're so mad at what happened with the reboot, that now there's a new appreciation for the prequels. It's a very interesting subculture.
That's true. That's true. I've had that conversation with you and another buddy of mine too. Yeah. Where it's like, okay, maybe we're a little too harsh on the prequels when they came out.
Let me put it like this: I saw Rise of Skywalker twice in theaters. I still have no idea what the plot is. I have no idea what they were fighting against. I have no idea why anybody did anything, including Palpatine. But again, going back to your original question, I don't know how to correlate him with the sports figure. It's kind of tough. It'd probably be a coach, though. It wouldn't be a player.
Or a musician, maybe. Maybe that's a better analogy.
It's tough. Again, it's hard because, he sold it for $4 billion.
Yeah. Well, and they had Skywalker sound and like the sound design angle of it.
THX was like Dolby. Yeah. It was like a competitor to Dolby. Yeah. And
plus all the video games and the other merch and
Shadows of the Empire on N64, bro. Don't let me find that on eBay. I will bankrupt myself. That game was fire. I'm sure it's probably like $10, but it was fire, dude. Oh. Dude, N64, you know what?
I played some Mario 64 a couple months ago.
Hey,
for the first time in a long time.
It's not an easy game. Let me tell you something.
It is hard.
It's a really hard game.
The one level where you're having to like race the penguin on the ice and like move around, it's
a very advanced system, dude. And then I'm not even going to bring up GoldenEye. What the GoldenEye? What was a sleepover without GoldenEye? Like that was middle school. Yeah, you got GoldenEye in the cut. All right, coming over, man. I'm done with y'all, man. Then now what do I have to deal with? I have to deal with FIFA. I got to pay $400 to put together a team to compete against some 6-year-old in Boise. I seriously, dude, I am so over sports video games right now. I love Call of Duty. We might need to jump back on that once life returns back to normal. But sports video games, no. I'm over it. I'm sorry.
We talked about this in our production meeting yesterday. We do need to have an expose.
Yeah.
What happened to the college football video game, the NCAA football? It's
a dark story, man. It's dark. And all NCAA games, because there was a basketball franchise that wasn't very good. But all of them, bad, man, bad. So, but FIFA, I just saw as a tweet or an ad. I didn't watch the video. It was like, oh, the new ad for FIFA 21. I was like, do you think people are going to fall for that again? People aren't buying FIFA. Get out of here. I'm over it. Anyway, I'm sorry. I got a sidetrack there. We got on Star Wars and FIFA. I mean, you really, it's like, what else are you going to say to trigger me? I mean, it's like,
Very unlike us to get distracted and off topic here on this show.
Yeah, it never happens.
We are about to be joined by one of my college roommates and a friend of yours as well, Professor Kris Jordan from the Computer Science Department at UNC-Chapel Hill. And we're going to talk to Kris about the challenges of distance learning and trying to hold classes in the times of coronavirus and the different things that they're doing at UNC-Chapel Hill and at campuses across the country to get students back on campus and to continue learning. So with no further ado, here we go. All right, joining us on the program today, a longtime friend of the Word, a longtime friend of mine and James, Professor Kris Jordan from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Kris, thanks for joining us. How you doing, man?
Doing well. Glad to be here. Glad to be helping reincarnate one of my favorite college STV shows. Honestly, I think I've blacked out about everything that I remember from STV other than y'all's amazing show with the killer intro.
Hey, the theme song is still around. We're still alive.
We still use the same theme song, yeah.
Why fix what isn't broken?
Couldn't have said it better. So thanks for joining us. We wanted to talk a little bit about school in general restarting, but especially UNC-Chapel Hill, a place that's near and dear to all of our hearts. For those that don't know you as well as we do, just give us a little background on your history at UNC and what you're doing there these days.
Sure. So I did my undergraduate at UNC with these two fine folks from 2003 to 2007 and studied computer science. After that, I went to graduate school in the Northeast and then did some things with starting a consultancy in industry. And had the opportunity, a professor reached out back in 2015 and asked if I was still interested in teaching, which was something that I thought would be a really exciting thing to do, especially at UNC. And so I jumped on that opportunity in 2015, and I joined the computer science department as a teaching assistant professor. And I've been in that role for the past 5 years now. And the courses I teach are primarily in the introductory sequence. That's the place where I feel like I can have the biggest impact. And I really enjoy the process of introducing programming to students, especially at a school like UNC, where people don't necessarily come to it expecting to fall in love with computer science and programming. And so as opposed to many more technical schools where many folks or the average student maybe even has prior experience, that's not necessarily the case with UNC's population. And so I teach a class called Comp 110, and that is the introductory programming course. And then I've been working to help reconfigure some of the introductory sequence in the computer science curriculum to fix some of the problems actually that I felt like I experienced back in the early 2000s that are still prevalent over the past few years. And I'm excited to say that we've rolled out some new courses. I'm the instructor of record for one of those, which is about systems programming and tools. But yeah, so I think one of the things as I've reflected on the last 5 years, if I'm going to brag a little bit about the work that we've done, and I think one of the things that we've been doing that's really different from what we experienced as undergraduates is employing undergraduates to help teach the course. So every year I've got about 50 students a semester who are helping me run the course as TAs, but they're undergraduates, not graduate TAs. And that allows us to work at a pretty big scale. So what I kind of realized was a pretty wild thing is that in the past 5 years, I've actually taught more contact hours than any other instructor at UNC, which feels like a pretty big accomplishment and pretty wild to think about.
Well, and let's not skip over the fact that your straight out of Comp 110 stickers have gone viral. And other than an intramural champion shirt, it's probably the most sought after thing at UNC these days.
Yeah, I don't have one on me right here. I can pull up a picture, but yeah, the straight out of Comp 110 felt like a good enough pun to put on a sticker, and that's what students get as they finish the class. I've got a number that I need to give out to the folks who finished up in the spring but weren't on campus, but we're going to find a way.
Well, hopefully if James and I nail the rest of this interview, we can get one for our
I was
Sure.
going to say, how do I get one?
Yeah, I've got a bunch of them sitting in Sitterson Hall right now.
Oh gosh, it takes me back.
All right. Well, but before we look forward and what's ahead over the next couple weeks and months, I do want to look back a little bit. Just going back to late February, early March, when things were starting to kind of change and we could sort of see the wheels turning. Just sort of take me through that time, and when did you kind of get a sense that something was going to happen and that life as we knew it, especially on a college campus, was about to really change?
Yeah, so I have this distinct memory of seeing things on Twitter and seeing people, especially from the technical community out in San Francisco. I feel like they were in many ways ahead of the curve on realizing this might be a big deal. And so I was reading these stories about China and wasn't necessarily too concerned. But I do remember when the number, I remember watching the growth chart in China and thinking, holy smokes, that is a growth rate that is unbelievable. And then it did start to peak, and it seemed like a little bit less concerning. But then once things started happening in Italy, I remember thinking, oh boy, this is going to be bad because it's growing exponentially. And I started writing down on my whiteboard in Sitterson Hall. On February 25th was the first day I wrote down the Johns Hopkins number for how many cases there were in Italy. And every day I wrote down the number, and I'm seeing like this is growing at that rate. I think the last entry was like the 6th of March or something. And so I just saw this yesterday because I went back to my office to grab a book. And it felt like, wow, this is going to be, if it's in Italy and it's growing that fast in Italy. And the other thing that I remembered was reading a story about what it took in Wuhan to actually get it under control. And we talk about being locked down in the United States right now, but like it's nothing compared to what they did to lock down that community. And so I remembered being pretty freaked out and having a meeting with my team the Sunday before we had spring break. So there was a few days of class left before spring break was going to happen. Or actually, there's a full week before spring break was going to happen. And so that prior Sunday, I actually polled my team and tried to see where they were at with like understanding and how much concern they had. And there's very little. But I think I freaked some of them out. But I, in retrospect, I did not have at all an appreciation that it would become what it has become. And I think I said something to my class, actually, my big class, saying, be careful over spring break and take this thing seriously, because at that point we still thought we would probably be coming back. It wasn't until spring break that you realized, oh no, this is going really horribly. And I was glad that UNC made the call to not have students return from being abroad, or not abroad, but out on spring break.
That's got to be a really weird sensation, though, to like for we talk about it on the show all the time, where I'm like, oh yeah, they told us we got to go home, so I'm working from home. But that's got to be weird. Like, you think about the disruption that would cause on a college campus where you have people from literally all over the world, and you basically, well, you can't come back. Your stuff might still be here. You might be finishing up like a really ambitious, mentorship program, and now you have to figure out a way to get around that. Like, did that affect like your plans for, maybe you talked about some of the changes that you were trying to bring into the computer science program. Like, did those get affected at all? I mean, I'm sure they did logistically, but. So
there were a number of really interesting and kind of and many sad things that occurred in that transition. I think probably the group that I feel most for, and a number of students that I worked with who were TAs of mine, were abroad for the spring semester. And when they hear the president saying we are banning travel from Europe, and they're in Europe, and now they're scrambling to get a ticket, and it turns out they weren't actually banning Americans, and it was just
Yeah.
such a poorly communicated thing.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, every study abroad program gets cut short and becomes a remote learning program. And I think initially we thought, well, maybe some places would be able to write it out. And eventually it just became clear, and by eventually I mean in a matter of a few weeks, that we're going to have to bring everybody back. And ultimately that was certainly the right call. But that's a really brutal experience when you think you're spending a semester abroad. Like my one student in particular was staying in Copenhagen, and so she had made it from January through March, beginning of March in Copenhagen, which is like, there's very little daylight during that time. Like you're putting in that time to get the end of the semester, and it gets cut short. And so on campus, I think I didn't get the sense that I didn't hear stories of people who tried to travel abroad during that time and had those kinds of difficulties. But there were issues of like, can I even get back into my dorm to get my stuff? Mm-hmm. And we were lucky. I actually was very grateful that UNC made the decision to extend spring break by an extra week. There were many institutions that didn't do that and just immediately cut back. And I don't know how that would have worked. It took that full week to figure out how the heck we were going to pivot. And I think students needed that in order to figure out how they were going to react as well.
You mentioned that pivot. Just sort of take us through obviously things changed a lot in moving to remote learning, but just sort of take us through the steps that y'all took and what that transition has been like for you and your students both.
So both of the classes all three of the classes that I was teaching in the spring were already pretty large lecture. There were 60 plus students in them. And Comp 110 was like 350. And so I felt like I couldn't imagine making a valuable use out of having 350 students join Zoom at the same time and trying to do a lecture live in the same way that we were doing before. So I pretty quickly decided to transition to asynchronous only, where I'm going to spend the morning recording whatever lecture and trying to break it up into ways that were a little bit more digestible, posting that and having questions related to that to ensure that people actually moved through it. So I moved to an async only model, and so did some of the other folks. I think that was more popular with the instructors who had larger enrollments because, again, Zoom with 350 people just isn't a very happy experience when you're fumbling with things. And for assignments, we wound up trying some new things. Like quizzing and assessments became a real challenge. There was a lot of concern with what to do about academic misconduct and how you could detect it. And ultimately that feels like a really tough battle to fight. And I think we have to rely on the best intentions of UNC students to a certain degree. And I think what I'm seeing, and this is maybe getting a little bit ahead, as I'm thinking towards the spring was really a little bit different from what I think we're up against this fall, because the spring you had a few months of regular interactions to build a rapport. And so you didn't necessarily worry about like, are students going to form connections? How are they going to perceive you? And how do they get to know you when you've never even actually been in the same room? It was more of a like, let's bring this thing home and do what we need to do there. And so we wound up trying to emphasize more like just staying up with the material and being as flexible as possible. Because I think to get back to James's question, what was really difficult when this transition needed to happen for students immediately is that the conditions you're going back to are not equitable. And so like if you're now having to take care of your younger sibling in a way that you wouldn't have on campus, or you're needing to now pick up a job that is really like scheduled at a similar time or you don't have as much flexibility. I think we needed to be much more flexible in the spring because people just didn't have a chance to plan their life around the massive transition that came about.
So do you like teaching remotely? I mean, I can't imagine that it's something that is, you had to, transition to it so quickly. And I've heard various things. A lot of it's kind of more clickbait type stories, but Is this something that you feel like you've adjusted to, or that you could enjoy, or is it a challenge? Like, what's your experience been?
So it's pretty interesting. I think that initially, my initial reaction was it wasn't one that really got a lot of time to reflect on it. It was mostly like, how do we make do with what we've got? Yeah. I had done some pre-recorded, something that has become a little bit more popular as an instructional style since we were in college is the flipped model, where a lot of the instructional content happens outside of class, and then you're doing more practice questions in class. I think we saw probably a few classes at UNC that were like that, but that's become much more popular. And I actually really like that model. So there had been some prior pre-recording of lectures and stuff. So it wasn't like it was a big adjustment on that regard, but it was a big adjustment in needing to keep my expectations for the content I could produce on that short of a time frame in check. Like, it just had to be ready to go by the time class met. And so that was a bit of an adjustment there. But to get to the question of do I enjoy it, I have enjoyed trying to reconfigure and try and get the maximal amount of value out of what this new situation affords. What I mean by that is, I think when you're faced with new constraints, you have the opportunity to reinvent some things that maybe were accidental things that you were facing before. And one of those things that I think I'm most intrigued by is, previously in a normal class, everyone would physically need to go and show up into a room at the same time and be there on a regular schedule. And there was not a lot of flexibility in that. And there wasn't really a way of wondering, is this the best use of everybody's time? Similarly, if you wanted one-on-one help, I think it required going to a physical location and working one-on-one with a TA, or going to a review session, like moving your body physically somewhere for the sake of being there, is now something that I'm not sure makes sense in some cases. And what I think I'm excited to explore a bit this fall is a question of, can we use synchronous time when it's valuable and for interactions where interacting with other students makes sense, and having some face-to-face time, but maybe not use all of a lecture's time to be synchronous, and giving some time to open back up to asynchronous and be a little bit more flexible. And I think that by not in class, when everyone's sitting in a lecture hall, you want to squeeze out as much as possible into that time as you can. And that sort of relaxation of a constraint is kind of interesting. So I am enjoying some of that. I'm trying to have fun with some of the streaming. I've got some things set up that are going to be pretty fun in OBS. I've learned that over the summer. There are things that you can do with OBS that feel pretty primo and don't require a lot of post-processing. And that was fun to kind of play around with and try and figure out this summer. I taught a class to kind of get ready and try out some ideas.
Well, if you get bored during the semester, we could use a new technical director here at the Word. Marcus is really falling down on his responsibilities.
Yeah, we got to fire this intern. It's really sad. it's kids don't know.
One last thing I'll say that I'm excited about is because we actually have Zoom has a 500 participant limit in my section of 110. Because we're not in a classroom this semester, I had them push it beyond what a classroom and also Zoom could hold. And so I'll be streaming live on YouTube classes this time around, and I think that'll be a pretty interesting change of pace.
This is what I'm talking about. This is interesting. I like this idea of, like you said, taking the constraint and let's just try something new. And that's really exciting. I told Rich the other day, yesterday, sorry, all the days run together. I started taking one of those online, or I have a app that teaches you how to play piano. And it was really crazy. When we were kids, I was telling Rich, I didn't play an instrument because my parents were like, what do you think, we're going to get someone to teach you, to play piano? We don't have a piano. We don't have money for lessons. Now you can do it online. It's relatively affordable. So you could take, computer science classes or whatever classes you want. You don't have to physically transport yourself. and it kind of maybe opens up some doors for that you wouldn't normally have available.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and I think that that's something that I'm hoping to explore. Where I'm behind where I need to be. Is classes start on Monday, but the hope is to try and put out some press mid next week or early the following week that says like, hey, if you're a high school student who wants some exposure to computer science, go to YouTube and you can see what we're doing at UNC, and that feels really cool because in my high school in Rutherfordton, North Carolina, there were no computer science classes. And so I think it'd be great to have access opened up a little bit more broadly.
Well, building off of that, now that you've had a few months to kind of adjust and figure out a game plan and prepare for the 2021 school year, what's sort of your plan for this semester, just for your classes specifically, but also looking university-wide, sort of what's the vibe, what's the sort of big picture plan for everybody there?
Yeah, so I think the thing that's been most concerning for remote-only classes, or to back up and try and give a little bit of a better picture of how things are going to be working at UNC this semester, at least to start out. No idea how long we're going to be able to maintain some on campus or not, but as far as I know, at this point in time right now, we are starting classes online for classes that had enrollments of up to 50, I believe was like the maximum. It may have even been 40. And the way that they do that is a class of 50 can fit into a classroom that was designed for 400, and people just spread out. And that scales all the way down to smaller classes. There's some stat I think I've seen that's like 40% of classes or so are this hybrid face-to-face. I think that number may be true for the individual instances of classes, but I think if you looked at what is the student's experience like, it would be fewer than 40% of their classes, because so many are going to be in classes that are bigger than that. And so if you looked at the number of people enrolled in these classes, I think there are fewer contact hours. It wouldn't be 40% of contact hours are going to be face-to-face. I think contact hours would be a much smaller number. But for the bigger classes, there's just no space on campus, and it doesn't really make sense. And so for that, I think the concern that a lot of us have who teach the 50 plus enrollment classes is how do you ensure that there are going to be connections? And this is especially true for first year students who don't know anybody else on campus and are having a really bizarre experience coming into a place like UNC in this time. And so we're looking for ways of trying to take a classroom and make it feel smaller. And I think that that's something that is actually more possible online remotely than it is in a lecture hall that can hold 450 people, right? Like it's really hard to feel like you're getting to know the people around you very well in a big classroom. And so what we're going to try and do is have houses that the undergraduate TAs lead these houses. This was a Harry Potter inspired idea that my TAs came up with.
Is there a sorting hat or?
I'm honestly a little out of my league on the Harry Potter references, so I need to go do some due diligence on that.
Me too. I've never seen any of them. I have no idea what a sorting hat is.
I think there was like an Instagram or a Snapchat filter where you could do the sorting hat and like get sorted into one of the Harry Potter houses.
Oh, nice. That's a good point. Well, I mean, we're going to have a process of trying to figure out how to place people, because I think that like trying to find affinities, like first years who are majors or first years who are non-majors, but in the humanities, and trying to find cohorts that have something in some shared thread that feel like it would be worth your time to get to know these people, and that you would have a common interest. So that's, I think, how we're going to try and combat that. I was really hopeful to try and have that be a part of the live lecture experience. But it's like due to scheduling, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to get enough of the undergraduate TAs. There's another really popular course that a lot of them are in that conflicts. So this might be a Fridays only type of thing. And we might try and organize some like early semester. I think this would fall off by the end of the semester, but early semester games nights where there are some pretty fun Zoom games you can play to try and get some exposure to other students that's not purely focused on the content. Content-wise, I'm seeing, as I kind of mentioned, this idea of a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous, where the synchronous, I feel like, is really good for practicing and for holding yourself accountable and for keeping people in like moving forward at a pace that allows you to be confident that you're not falling behind. I think so with that, we'll do live polling types of questions where we give a challenge question, we do a live poll, and hopefully we can still break out into smaller rooms and in Zoom where they would be into smaller groups and could discuss. But I don't know that that needs to be for entire hour 15 lectures. And so I think starting a lecture with some synchronous that just keeps people in check, keeps you moving forward, and then breaks, goes a little bit more loosely structured to where you can do it at your own pace. And that actually really works nicely with programming, because one of the problems that we run into with programming is some people will get stuck on some like little issue and then be behind for the rest of the lecture or just not be able to catch up. But when you're doing that type of tutorial-based learning, being able to pause the video or just come get help and then return to it and not feel like, oh, I'm behind everybody else, I think is going to be a good thing. We're doing some more open-ended projects, and I think that's going to be a great change because I don't think we can have as much emphasis on the assessment given that the conditions for assessment are so varied in what people are up against. Those are the primary things for remote. I mean, I think a lot of thought is going into how do we ensure that people feel connected and that this doesn't just feel like a Coursera course. And I think that the combination of having access to resources and being in a class that's live with peers who share something in common with you that you're connected with really does make it a very different feel from a massively online course. And this was my experience this summer. I taught it was a 30-person course, but it was actually, I think, one of the best courses we've run. And it was great to interact with students, even though it was remote.
So one of the things that we've talked about a lot on the show in the past couple of weeks is our opinions about what should or shouldn't happen with schools. So it's probably not wise for me to just come out and straight out and say, should people be going back to school? It's probably going to be kind of a little bit of a tricky political situation. But are there, so to backtrack, are there any concerns that you have with returning to campus or students returning to campus, not just in the classroom, but also in the dorms or in the residential areas around campus? Is that something that maybe you don't have time or get a chance to think about that? I don't know. I don't know what where you place yourself in that.
It's interesting. I feel pretty lucky in that I am teaching remotely and don't really need to navigate the complexities of that personally. I think if you said, hey, like, can I sell you a pretty expensive ticket to be to go on a cruise right now, but that cruise was actually parked on South Campus and named Morrison, like, would you is that a cruise you want to go on? And I'm not sure.
That is what Morrison is. It is a cruise ship, actually.
And I don't know how to navigate that. It sounds like people, like a lot of the students that I'm talking to, are choosing to live remotely. The statistics still looks like 65% capacity on dorms was the last I saw, which that still feels pretty high when you think about a suite of 8 students sharing a single bathroom or a hall style dorm like Everett, where that's still a lot of people in a closed space. It's not the one person to a room type of a scenario. And so I think what's really tricky is how to reconcile like where we're at right now with where we're at in the decision-making process. And it's kind of felt like a frog boil, the classic cliche story of the frog in the pot that's the heat's slowly rising and it doesn't realize that it needs to get out of the pot. the numbers, I think when some of these plans first came into place, like when we were one of the first universities that announced we're going to be back on campus and we're going to do all these things, we've got a great school of public health, I understood that argument, and I was actually pretty excited for that argument because it felt like we had the opportunity to be somewhat of a bubble, right? We have a hospital, we have good public health, we have labs that can run tests. I think the initial argument was, hey, if anybody can isolate and track down cases and do all the right things, like our community should be able to do that. But I think that had an assumption that we would be in a better place by August 6th than we are on August 6th. And it's hard for me to personally reconcile like that it hasn't really, the plan hasn't really changed, even though the reality has kind of shifted from where that plan was put into place. The other thing that's a real challenge is it's hard to understand who actually has the decision-making power here. I actually think the Board of Governors has asserted that they've got the power to make this decision, and they're going to be the ones driving this decision this fall. And so it's not even the chancellor that gets to make the call. That was something I read a few weeks ago. And the Board of Governors and the amount of control they have over the system is another really big concern, I think, when it comes to how is this decision going to be made and why isn't the decision going to be made more locally. I actually really liked the Orange County proposal that went out somewhat recently, which said, it's fine for students to be on campus if they have that need. And I think that recognizing that for many students, being on campus is actually a much better learning environment than being at home. The internet's going to be better. There's fewer distractions. There's more facilities, all of those things. And so I think for a non-trivial portion of students, I don't know if it's 10, 20, 30%, there are real advantages to being at school academically. And so doing everything remote and having some portion of students in dorms, I think would be a very reasonable next step. But all of this is way beyond my pay grade as a teaching professor.
Right. So, Kris, obviously, as you move into new styles of learning and new methods and face a whole bunch of different challenges, I'm just curious, as an outsider looking at what elementary, middle, high school educators are having to go through, what kind of common ground do you guys have? I mean, obviously you have a few more tools at your disposal and you're dealing with a little bit of a mature base of students than some of those other teachers are, but just curious, looking at it just from an educator perspective overall, how you feel about what those educators are going through and what students are going to have to go through and how that whole landscape looks, and as schools are in some places have already started back around the country.
Yes, I think what's really tough when I try and imagine the challenges of K through 12 is when your students don't have as much agency over their day as a college student, and they're now in an environment where their parents have schedules that are going to have to mesh in some way. There's going to be varying levels of access. There's going to be even much greater varying levels of technology available to you, although some systems like in Orange County are trying to make sure that there's a level playing field on that regard by, I think, having iPads for all primary school students and laptops for high school students that are at least on par with one another, so that can be guaranteed. But I don't know that that's going to be true in every county. I have to believe in certain counties, like the one in Rutherfordton, in Rutherford County where I'm from, I haven't heard that plan there. And so I think at UNC and at most colleges, there's a standard for what technology a student has to have in order to be a student. And being able to assume some of those things makes my life much easier than I think if I couldn't assume those things. And so I think there's a big challenge in how can you ensure that students are actually going to be available during the time that you're teaching? And if they're not going to be available, are you now needing to record earlier? I think what's really tough is as a college instructor, you've really got, I still wind up spending almost the entire day prepping material and then going into lecture and trying to keep the course on track. But as a K through 12 teacher, you're spending most of your hours in the school are contact hours. And I think that if you're expected to produce materials asynchronous, that's going to be incredibly tough to like manage multiple different classes, prepare those materials, disseminate them in a way that students can follow along. Like that's a real challenge that I have a hard time imagining. But on the flip side, if you're trying to do things all at the same time, you're going to be up against students who their home schedules aren't going to be able to afford that. And so I'll admit a good deal of ignorance here and not knowing what is looking like the common strategies for fighting this. But I think it is a really challenging proposition. And I think for parents, it's an especially challenging proposition to have your students, your kids at home and needing to manage that and your work. And this is something that actually does have a pretty big intersection with college instructors who are professors and have young children and are now needing to juggle that as well. And so some instructors who have classes that would have otherwise been possible to teach in person are needing to do it from home, but they're also needing to take care of their kids. And so I think that's a really tough, I feel a little bit lucky to not necessarily need to navigate that in the situation I'm currently in, but I have mad respect for the people who are doing that because it just seems like a crazy confluence of challenging problems.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. Like we were doing a little production meeting yesterday, just talking about like what would it be like if you had, it's early August. We're all from North Carolina. I mean, I remember we started in middle school, high school. We started up August 18th, August 20th. We're back,
yep.
And it's like, well, what are we going to do if we got to send our the kids are going back or they're not, and then as a parent you have to figure out. We have to, it's already hard enough in the best of circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I agree with you there. Do you, along those lines though, do you think that, and this is something we talked about yesterday, I have this certain feeling that we're at this watershed moment where we have to rethink how we do education, but definitely higher education, where you're sending people or they're going on their own to different parts of the country and the world. Do you think that this is going to affect how we look at the long-term or maybe medium-term outlook of what it looks like to go to college? Not just because in the next year or so we might still be dealing with the health crisis, but even beyond that, it just sort of seems like things have to be re-examined now out of necessity. But will that have effects in the future?
It would be really hard to try and defend a position of thinking like things would be exactly the same after this plays out. Like we get a vaccine and it's back to 2019 again. Like I think across all sectors, not just higher education, we're all going to see a shift towards being much more open to this idea of connecting like we are right now. Like typically, if this were 2019, we'd be like, well, are we crazy for doing a podcast where we're not in the same room? Like, yeah. And that prevents a lot of opportunities from coming to be. So I think that the optimist in me thinks that there will be some new things that emerge from this. I mean, even like learning some of the tools like OBS is going to change the way that I'm teaching things and producing things in the future. And it's going to lead to tools that make that even easier and more readily available. So I think when it comes to higher education, I think there's going to be inevitably significant impacts. This is something that I think I've been like somewhat cautiously nervous about because I think that at some point the other shoe is going to drop. And when we see what is the enrollment drop at our institution, at other institutions, there's going to be hard decisions that need to be made. I think there are going to be people who really question, like, is the $50,000 I'm paying for this private school experience that's only so really worth that cost when there are online options that are high quality at a fraction of that cost? And I think that's a very legitimate question to be asking. I think there are a few industries, if you look at, I think over the past 50 years, that like the curve of costs have gone crazy. Healthcare is one of them, and higher education is another one. And I think that it's a very valid question to ask, why is that? And now that we're able to do some more things at scale using technologies that didn't exist before, is it going to be the same? And I don't think it will be. But I do think there is a significant value in the college experience. I do think that for a school like Carolina, where in public schools in general, where you're not taking out there are going to be many people taking out loans, especially out of state students who are coming. It's a harder cost proposition, but it's much more justifiable to be at a state school right now than it is to be not at one. And so I think that we're pretty well positioned for that. So I'm locally not being too cautious or too concerned. But I do think there are absolutely going to be changes, and navigating those, I think, is kind of exciting and will be interesting, because I think it hopefully will bring us to a better place. But I do think you can't replace the college experience outside of there being a pandemic, that is being surrounded by people who have similar interests to you, have similar intellectual capacities, and are interested in nerdy stuff, and trying to navigate how is it that we're going to go from being high schoolers who are dependent on our parents to adults, and the weird opportunities and friendships, as you both know, that arise from that. I think is something that's special, that a purely online experience, I think, would miss out on.
Yeah, I mean, as an outsider, I think some of the reaction to the education and remote learning is similar to what some of the reaction was to work from home stuff. I think that there's a chance that we can sort of learn from this and incorporate some of the tools and the skills that people have to develop to adapt in the short term, and then sort of create this hybrid medium long term where we can incorporate some of that. But to your point, I mean, you can't replicate the college experience online. There's nothing like being in a crowded dorm or suite, and that's just not something you can do on Zoom.
Yeah, this may be a little bit of a digression, but I think there are some interesting models that are being experimented with of primarily remote, but you were with cohorts that travel around the world. Like there's a Minerva school that has this model. And I could see things becoming much more flexible of you could still be a UNC student and you could study abroad, but be taking UNC classes if some of the ones that were abroad didn't make sense, and getting the best of both worlds for something like that. And so I think just some things that we probably thought weren't possible before are going to be a little bit more open to seeing in the future. Another example is we've constrained class sizes to being the size of classrooms at UNC. And this semester, I'll learn whether or not we can go beyond that and still provide a great experience. In the future, I think the great experience would be I think the large lecture experience of sitting in a hall with 400 people is not the best, to say it lightly. But
it's a necessary evil in some.
Yeah, but if there's a way to deliver the content and have engaging sessions, but not have to have everyone in the same room while that's going on, and be able to have smaller breakouts that are in person, and try and get the best of both worlds in that way. I actually think that could be a model that serves the students better than packing 400 people into a big room twice a week.
Kris, thanks so much for coming on. Any plugs, any shout outs, any info you need to get out that we didn't ask you about?
No, I think this was great. I appreciate you all having me on. I think it's a really weird time, and the thing that seems optimistic to me is there is an end date that we're moving towards. At some point, we're going to get through this, and that's going to be an exciting time span. I don't know what that's going to be, but I think that to the extent that you all are innovating on a show like this and trying to rekindle some passion, and other people are finding ways of doing things that they weren't doing before that are keeping them engaged is great. And so I'm excited to see that going on in higher education. And I think that on the other side of this, like there will be a lot of things that we'll realize we've improved on faster than we would have, and we've changed faster than we would have, and ultimately we'll come through whole on the other side.
Well, best of luck this semester. Thanks so much for coming on, and stay healthy, stay safe, and good luck with everything, man.
Likewise. Good to see y'all again.
All right, so that was a very informative talk with Kris, James. What's sort of your big takeaway from all that?
Well, I remember seeing a tweet very early on in when things were getting really bad domestically, when we were starting lockdown, and I believe it was from Stephen Pressfield, who's an author who wrote a book called The War of Art, kind of a take on the Sun Tzu book, The Art of War. He's written some other books as well, but his whole take is on the power of mastering yourself to overcome obstacles, and whether it's writing a book or starting a company. And he made a really good tweet that he said basically that the coronavirus is not ready for the ingenuity that the human spirit is going to come out with. And it's interesting talking to Kris, because it's clear that when you're forced into a situation at a couple of weeks' notice, and you have to change around everything that you're doing, and then also somehow also think long term, but also think about what the experience your students are going to have and your staff. It is really inspiring. So as much as we kind of get a little bit, I get very angry on the show about government response or sports, returning too early or schools opening back up. I like the idea that he's taking it in stride, because he doesn't have any other choice, and I think there's a lot to learn from that, because I think that I'm in a very privileged position where I'm like, I'm working from home, and my life hasn't been affected that much, but here's someone whose entire career is about talking to students face to face for the most part, and that is now not on the table for the most part. So I'm very inspired by that.
Well, what's the old saying? Necessity is the mother of all invention.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing.
That to me was the most interesting part of it, is how he sort of pivoted his teaching style and the types of teaching methods that he's using and doing, asynchronous. That was just stuff was not really a thing when we were in college, which is unfortunately longer ago now than either of us would like to admit. But it was just, all right, you show up to class and you have your lecture, or you maybe have a quiz, or maybe break into groups and do something for a little bit, and then you go on your way. Maybe an assignment gets posted that you do offline, but it was pretty much come to class and learn what you need to learn and then go home and do your work. And it's cool that they're finding other ways that might work better regardless of the situation that we're in, to reach people or to make it easier for them to learn the material or to keep up with the material. So that to me is the most interesting thing of all this is, okay, how can we not just get by in the short term and figure out how we're going to make this work, but how can we kind of, I don't want to say experiment, but how can we figure out different ways to do this that we can take into, a couple of years from now, if things are back to normal, and make the experience better for everybody involved. That to me is an intriguing thing, and I know we get away from it from time to time, but we do try to find the silver lining in the show when bad things happen, and that to me is one of them. And I know we've talked about it a little bit on the show before with the work from home possibilities and what that means moving forward for people, and if there's a way to make some of that more efficient. And I think the same goes for education. And I have a couple educators in my family that are more in the K-12 public school system, and I have a few more reservations and concerns about what's going on there than at the college level, for reasons that we talked about with Kris a few minutes ago. But I am still just intrigued to see how all of this goes overall, because it's such an important part of our society, and I feel like it's been neglected a little bit in recent decades. And we're seeing, I think, the fallout from that in a lot of ways right now. And I think finding a way to continue to educate people and to find a way to do it a little more efficiently or creatively or proactively is going to be something that I'm going to continue to monitor and something that's potentially exciting.
Yeah, really, really good to get a different viewpoint from somebody that's in the field. So we'll have to keep that streak going here, which means Marcus is going to have to really be on his grind. It's good to at least have Marcus back in the studio. We had to track him down, but I mean, it's the intern life. You got to be here. You got to be here.
Apparently, one of us approved a really long PTO stretch for him and didn't remember it.
Interns with PTO, boy, these benefits, man, it's a lot different than when I was in school.
Hey, listen, we have a great benefits package. What can I say?
Well, I'm really glad that we're expanding the viewpoints here. I think we should keep that going. So hopefully we can manage to bring in some other perspectives on some of the things we've been talking about here on the program, and as we continue navigating what has been a very interesting period in life, as we go into month 4 or 5 of coronavirus here and semi-quarantine lockdown, but now schools are about to go back in. Sports are started back up. Some people are going back into work that weren't before, but there are still those that are not able to do that, and so that's
teachers especially are having to go back. And,
Don't
think that's going to go that great, but we'll see.
It is very awkward. Or it will be very awkward. But that being said, I think that we hope that us changing flipping the script a little bit brought some different viewpoints to the show for those of you that are listening. Obviously, as we've said many times before, please check us out on your favorite podcatcher app. We're on Apple Podcasts. We are on Spotify, Spreaker, YouTube, and even Google Podcasts. The main way to reach out. Let's get some DMs going. DM us at the word podcast, or you can just mention us, whatever you want to do.
I feel like we get into a little bit of a rhythm on the show. We hit a lot of the same topics on a regular basis. So if there's something that you guys want our take on or want to hear more about or want us to dive deep on, hit us up on Twitter, throw it out there. Listen, we have a menu, but every once in a while we like to get some customer feedback for some daily specials.
Oh my God, do you remember going out to restaurants and eating? Wow, I don't even know. Whoa.
I really actually do. I can't remember the last restaurant.
Me neither. I would murder a Subway sandwich right now. Boy, give me that tuna. Tuna, pepper jack, hot sauce. Don't look at me. Green peppers.
I don't want to look at you. I hate tuna.
What? I'm not even going to get into this with you right now. Because no. You and Marcus.
Tell you what. This is a great opportunity to look at for content for next week's show. Top 5 like complete non-starter foods for you. We're gonna break it down.
Okay, I like that. Yeah. All right.
Because there's some stuff where it's like, I don't really like it, but I'll eat it. And then there's something that's like, no, like if that is literally in the kitchen, I won't go in there.
Okay. All right.
Canned tuna is.
Who said anything about canned tuna?
I don't know if it's number 1 on the list.
Who said anything about canned tuna?
Well, you're talking about a tuna sub from Subway. It's the same.
No.
It's the same thing.
It's better.
Come on, you're not getting seared ahi tuna on your Subway sandwich.
I didn't say that I was getting seared ahi tuna.
You're talking about the goopy, wet cat food tuna salad.
Boy, you better chill talking about this tuna sandwiches from Subway like that.
They're not to go full Taylor Swift, Katy Perry, but I think there's a little bad blood brewing for next week's show.
Dude, you know what? The Subway does deliver on Uber Eats. I'm about to have one for the show. Imagine me eating a tuna sandwich on air. Jesus Christ. It's good. It's a good sandwich. I'm getting one. Hey, I'll tell you another good sandwich, Subway, okay? And then we'll wrap the show up. The Italian is very underrated.
I would agree.
Good Subway sandwich. On the road, at the airport, it's one of the places that doesn't have a big line, right? You know what? I love the Atlanta airport. The Bojangles and Chick-fil-A line. It's like, are people getting tickets for Hamilton, or is this a fast food place? It just wraps around the entire gate, the whole terminal. Just people like, what? Don't you?
Not anymore.
Yeah, I guess not. It's like
the Chick-fil-A line always moved.
At the Atlanta airport.
Atlanta Airport Terminal A, yeah. They were always very efficient.
They're a very efficient organization, but I did not see that and again, I'm not blaming Chick-fil-A.
And if not, I'd go to that like soul food place on the other side.
Dude,
that was legit.
That's where I saw Akon. I saw Akon there one time. Everybody was like freaking out, and he was like there to fight.
Was he lonely?
He was actually with the Schmoopy, interestingly enough.
Was he with Young Jeezy? Trying to take
it easy?
It's the only way to go.
Woo. Well, for those of you that are still listening, this is actually a great throwback to how our shows typically ended in college, is that we would get to a point where it's like, oh, well, we're going to wrap it up. But then you know what? Sometimes you just got to keep it going a little bit and figure out that you're going to order a tuna sandwich and an Italian. I'm going to go 6-inch tuna, 6-inch Italian for the show next week. Oh, I'm so excited, dude. I don't know, though. I've been cutting the carbs out lately, so maybe I shouldn't. Lettuce.
Yeah, it's not on your keto.
I got to get a lettuce wrap. I'm going to do a tuna lettuce wrap. Jimmy John's.
All right. We got to end the show before I have to hear any more about this tuna sandwich or see it or anything like that.
Okay, thank you all for joining us for Richard Bruce Skywalker Abernathy.
He is James Israel Doncic Mundia. Thanks for listening to the Word Podcast. We'll catch you guys next time.
Dude, he is so fucking good. Oh my God, I love him.